All right, so you're with us today for a deep dive, and this one might seem a little bit um, heavy at first,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to be really interesting. And it's all about this idea, the emptiness of existence.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And it's from this 19th century philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
And we're going to be going through some excerpts, from his work that you shared with me.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to really kind of unpack what he meant by all this,
Mm-hmm.
especially, when it comes to like how he viewed time,
Yeah.
what it means to be human and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And we're not just going to summarize his ideas. We're going to try to like actually pull out some key insights,
Sure.
that might even like resonate with stuff that you've felt and noticed in your own life.
Absolutely.
So hopefully, we can make this kind of a thought-provoking deep dive.
Yeah. Schopenhauer starts off with this pretty stark assertion.
Okay.
He says that at the heart of all existence lies this fundamental emptiness.
Oh, wow. Okay. So right off the bat, we're getting into it.
Yeah, and when you first hear that, it can sound incredibly bleak, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But he digs deeper, and he starts to show us all these different ways that this emptiness actually plays out in our lives and in the world around us.
Okay, so like, how does this emptiness actually like show up? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, think about the sheer scale of things. For starters,
Okay.
the vastness of time stretching out seemingly forever and the immense expanse of space.
Yeah.
It makes our own individual lives, with their relatively short span, feel almost insignificant in comparison.
Right. Yeah, like just minuscule.
Exactly. And then there's the fleeting nature of the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's here and then poof, it's gone.
Right.
It becomes the past.
Yeah.
And, everything feels so dependent on other things.
Right.
Nothing seems to stand alone. And then, of course, there's that cycle we all know so well.
Yeah.
Wanting something, getting it, and then almost immediately wanting the next thing.
Yes. Tell me about it.
It's kind of like a treadmill, right?
Oh, boy, it totally is.
That treadmill of desire.
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer sees time as the very form through which this constant striving, this will to live, actually reveals its ultimately futile nature.
Oh, interesting.
He argues that time is constantly turning whatever we manage to grasp into something that no longer is
Right.
constantly reminding us of its impermanence.
So like, even when we get what we want, it's like it's already slipping away.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, he also has this really interesting take on the present moment.
Yeah.
He says it's actually better than the past, no matter how trivial it might seem,
Right.
because it's real, whereas the past,
Yeah.
well, it's not there anymore.
Exactly.
What's the insight there for us?
Well, what's fascinating here is how it might shift our focus.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer is suggesting that even those everyday moments,
Huh.
the ones that we might typically overlook,
Yeah.
actually have a reality
Okay.
that our memories, even our really cherished memories, simply don't possess in the same way. It raises the question of how much we should value and pay attention to what's happening right now.
Okay, so like be present, I guess.
Exactly, be present.
And this is where it gets even like weirder, I think.
Yeah.
He talks about like suddenly becoming aware of being alive,
Mm-hmm.
after who knows how many like ages of not existing.
Yeah,
And then like facing the prospect of going back to that non-existence at some point.
right.
It's a pretty wild thought to think about.
It is.
He connects this to Kant's idea, the philosopher Kant,
Yeah.
about time being this thing that like our minds kind of bring to the world.
Mhm.
It's not like it's really out there.
Right, it's not objective.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating is that sense of almost accidental existence,
Yeah.
Schopenhauer seems to be hinting at the sheer improbability of our being here at all,
Mhm.
sandwiched between these vast stretches of non-being,
Right, yeah.
and linking it to Kant's ideal nature of time suggests that our perception of time itself might play a role in how we experience this fleeting existence.
Okay, so time is like this mental construct that kind of shapes how we see everything.
Exactly.
All right, then he goes on to talk about how every day that passes actually diminishes us.
Yeah,
Like it brings us closer to the end.
right, closer to death.
But then he throws in this thought that maybe we're not that bothered by it. Because subconsciously we're aware of being part of something bigger. This inexhaustible fount of eternity, as he calls it.
That's a really interesting contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even while emphasizing the finite nature of our individual lives,
Uh-huh.
he suggests this underlying awareness of something timeless,
Right.
Almost as if that softens the impact of our limited time here.
Okay, yeah, like there's something beyond just our little lifespan.
Right, exactly.
It makes you wonder if there's like a deeper maybe even intuitive understanding that we have about the nature of existence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, this is where it gets a bit twisty, I think.
Yeah.
He mentions this idea that maybe the wisest thing to do is just enjoy the present moment, since it's the only real thing we have.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty logical, right?
It does on the surface.
But then he immediately calls that the greatest folly.
Yeah.
Like, why the sudden turn?
Well, the key to understanding that is his core belief in the fundamental emptiness.
Okay.
He's saying if the present is constantly slipping away like sand through our fingers, how can we possibly build any lasting meaning or purpose on something so ephemeral?
Right.
For Schopenhauer, it's just too insubstantial to justify any serious effort, if that's our main goal.
Oh, I see. So it's like you're building your house on sand, basically.
Exactly. It's not going to last.
To illustrate this point, he uses all these really vivid images,
Yeah, he does.
like a person running downhill who has to keep going faster and faster just to avoid falling.
Right.
Or a pole balanced on your fingertip.
Yeah, I love that one.
Or even a planet in orbit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they all have to keep moving just to stay where they are.
What's striking about those comparisons is that sense of relentless motion, you know? Yeah. They have to keep moving just to maintain their current state. And Schopenhauer uses this to illustrate the fundamental restlessness of our existence.
So, like, we can never really just stop and relax.
Yeah, we're constantly driven, constantly in motion, because to stop is to, in a sense, lose our footing.
Okay, so it's like this constant struggle to just stay afloat.
Yeah, pretty much.
And in this world of constant change and motion,
Yeah.
his view of happiness is pretty bleak.
Yeah, it is.
He even quotes Plato,
Right.
asking how could there be happiness, where, as Plato says, becoming continually and never being is the only form of existence.
Right.
That's a tough one.
It really cuts to the core of his pessimistic outlook, If everything is in this perpetual state of flux, constantly becoming, but never truly settling into being, then the idea of lasting happiness just seems like an illusion.
So, like, we're always chasing something, but never actually catching it.
Yeah, and we're always striving for something that's either just out of reach or it disappears as soon as we attain it.
That's frustrating thinking about it.
It is.
He sums it up by saying, we spend our lives chasing this imagined happiness, rarely catching it, and often ending up disappointed, like someone who survives a shipwreck,
Right.
only to find, like, nothing on the shore.
Exactly.
And he almost dismisses the whole thing,
Yeah.
saying, like, it doesn't even matter if you were happy or sad, because
Yeah.
life is just this brief present that's now gone.
It's a stark view for sure.
Yeah.
It highlights what he sees as the ultimate futility of our individual experiences when faced with the relentless flow of time and the finality of death. It's as if the journey, with all of its ups and downs, ultimately amounts to very little in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, so, like, all that striving, all that effort, all that, chasing after things.
Yeah.
In the end, it's like, it doesn't even matter.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
So what is the fuel then for all this constant motion?
Yeah.
This endless striving, what's pushing us?
Right.
Well, Schopenhauer boils it down to two pretty basic urges.
Yeah.
Hunger and the sex drive.
That's it.
Maybe with a sprinkle of boredom on top.
Yeah, a little boredom sprinkled in.
So basically we're all just driven by, like, our stomachs and our...
Our loins.
Yeah, exactly.
What's fascinating is how he sees these very primal drives, the need to eat and the urge to reproduce as the fundamental engine of all the incredible complexity of human and animal behavior.
Okay.
He actually uses this Latin term primum mobile.
Prima mobi.
Which essentially means the first mover or the fundamental driving force behind everything.
So these basic urges are like the root of all our complex actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
These seemingly simple impulses, he argues, are behind all the drama and all the variety that we see in the world.
So like wars and art and, building skyscrapers all comes back to like wanting to eat.
And wanting to procreate.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Okay.
And he doesn't just look at humans and animals either.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
He expands it to even inorganic matter.
Okay, so like rocks.
Of rocks, water, air, you name it.
Wow.
He sees it as constantly battling against these chemical forces that are trying to break it down.
So like inanimate objects are kind of in this struggle for existence.
Exactly, yeah. They're subject to these forces of entropy and decay.
And what about organic life then? like us.
Well, organic life like us is even more precarious.
Okay.
We need this constant intake of new material.
Right. We got to eat.
Yeah, we got to eat, we got to breathe. We need this continuous support from the outside world just to keep going.
So we're like super dependent on our environment.
Yeah, it's like that image he uses of balancing a pole.
Oh,
It requires constant effort just to stay upright.
So we're like constantly on the verge of like collapsing.
In a way, yes.
And then he makes this point that our consciousness, our awareness of the world only exists because of this fragile, constantly maintained organic life.
Right. For Schopenhauer, consciousness isn't this like universal property, It arises specifically from this intricate and constantly sustained biological existence.
So without this like very particular biological setup, there's no consciousness.
No consciousness. That's the idea.
Wow.
It makes you think about, what it really means to be aware.
Yeah, for sure.
And how precious and fragile that awareness might actually be.
So this kind of leads him to imagine like a different kind of existence, like an infinite one,
right?
That's untouched by anything external.
Yeah.
A place of total peace.
Total peace.
Without any change.
No change.
No time.
No time.
No variety at all.
It sounds a lot like Plato's idea of the forms,
Oh, really?
These perfect, unchanging realities.
I remember that from philosophy class.
Yeah, it's a clear echo of Plato's philosophy. This idea of a realm of perfect, stable being that contrasts so sharply with our world of constant change.
Yeah, I guess we are constantly changing.
We are.
And he suggests that like giving up this will to live, this fundamental striving that we've been talking about, might be the way to experience this kind of timeless state. So like if we can quiet that inner drive, maybe we can tap into something more permanent.
That's the suggestion.
He then uses this really interesting image, of a rough mosaic to explain how we actually see our lives.
Right.
So like up close, each individual piece, doesn't seem to do much.
Each little tile.
Yeah, each little tile.
Doesn't seem to have a lot of meaning on its own.
Right.
But when you step back and look at the whole thing, maybe some kind of picture emerges.
Right. So it's like our individual moments.
Yeah.
Might seem insignificant on their own, but maybe when you put them all together, there's some bigger meaning there.
That's a powerful way to think about our experiences, The day-to-day can feel insignificant or even frustrating. But it's only when we look back that we try to piece it all together and find some kind of narrative.
And he connects this to how we feel when we finally get something that we really wanted. Often it feels empty.
It does.
It's like this never-ending cycle.
It is.
Of always looking forward to something better.
Right.
While also looking back with like longing or regret.
Yeah, and never really being satisfied with where we're at.
Exactly. Yeah.
What stands out here is that sense of perpetual dissatisfaction. We're rarely fully content in the present because our minds are often occupied with either what's coming or what has been.
Right.
And we're constantly missing the reality of the now.
So we're never really present.
We're rarely truly present.
He says people often live ad interim.
Yeah.
Like they're just passing through, always waiting for something else to start. And they only realize at the end that what they were waiting for was their actual life.
That's a really poignant observation.
It is.
We can get so focused on some future point of happiness, or some idealized past, that we fail to fully engage with the present, which, as he said earlier, is the only reality we truly have.
And then he has this line.
Oh, yeah.
That's just brutal.
So mean.
He says, man, as a rule, is cheated by hope until he dances into the arms of death.
Wow. That's dark.
It's pretty stark.
It really underscores his pessimistic view of hope, as something that often misleads us, keeping our focus on an imagined future while life passes us by.
So he's saying hope is actually a bad thing.
We're saying that it can be a trap,
Okay.
If we let it distract us from the reality of the present moment.
He then comes back to this idea of how our individual will, our desires are never truly satisfied.
Right.
It's like as soon as we get one thing, we just want something else.
You want the next thing.
Yeah, it's a relentless cycle.
This constant turning of the wheel of desire is central to Schopenhauer's thinking, He sees this underlying will, this fundamental driving force, as something that by its very nature is never content with just a piece of the pie. It always wants more.
More.
More, always.
He even feels sorry for how this sovereign of the world, this powerful will, becomes diminished when it takes the form of an individual person.
Right. It gets kind of bottled up.
Yeah, bottled up.
Into this limited form.
And he says that's a key reason for human suffering.
Yeah, because we have this infinite desire, essentially, crammed into these finite beings.
Right, and that clash is where the suffering comes from.
Exactly.
Now, he really goes after this idea of life being an end in itself.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in what he calls the intellectually impotent yet sight.
Which is basically the present day.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to have much patience for that idea.
So he's saying like this whole idea that life has meaning just because it is.
Yeah.
He's not buying it.
Not at all.
He finds this notion that our existence, in this often difficult and fleeting world, could be its own ultimate purpose.
Right.
To be quite absurd.
He thinks it's ridiculous.
He argues that if this were the final goal, it would be a pretty illogical and ultimately unsatisfying one. Instead, he sees life as more like a task,
Okay.
with two main parts.
Two parts.
First, there's just surviving.
Yeah, just staying alive.
Gagner sa vie, as he puts it in French.
Right, earning your keep.
So that's the first challenge, just like making it day to day.
Exactly. The initial hurdle is simply staying alive, meeting our basic needs.
Right.
But Schopenhauer argues that this is only the first stage.
Okay, so there's a second stage.
There is.
What's that?
Well, once you've managed to survive,
Yeah.
a second task pops up.
Okay.
Fighting off boredom.
Boredom.
Yeah, he compares boredom to a bird of prey just waiting to pounce.
Oh, wow. So boredom is like this dangerous predator.
In a sense, yeah.
So once we're not constantly driven by these immediate needs,
right.
we're confronted with this underlying emptiness of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where boredom comes in.
And it's not just like a mild annoyance either, It's this constant need to fill the void, to distract ourselves from what he sees as the fundamental lack of inherent meaning in life.
Okay, so we're constantly trying to distract ourselves.
Yeah, we're trying to escape that boredom.
From that boredom, for that emptiness.
Exactly.
So the pattern is, first, you overcome your basic needs.
Right. You survive.
You survive.
Yeah.
You eat, you find shelter.
Yeah.
But then
And what?
you have to constantly find ways to keep that feeling of having overcome them.
Yeah.
From just turning into boredom.
Right. So it's like you win the game.
Yeah.
But then the reward is just like more game.
Exactly. It's this endless cycle of striving for something and then needing to find something else to strive for.
To avoid that emptiness.
Yes, to avoid that gnawing sense of emptiness. Okay, and this leads him to this really strong statement.
Yeah.
He says that human life must be some kind of mistake.
A big oopsie.
Yeah.
He bases this on the fact that we have these needs that are hard to satisfy. And when they are satisfied, we just end up in this neutral state that quickly becomes boring.
So it's like we're either suffering or we're bored.
Pretty much.
And there's no in between.
Not really.
And that to him is like evidence that this whole thing is just messed up.
For Schopenhauer, this constant swing between the pain of unmet needs and the emptiness of boredom is a key indicator that life in itself doesn't actually have intrinsic value.
Okay.
If life truly had inherent worth, he argues, we wouldn't experience this deep sense of boredom when our immediate needs are met.
Okay, so true fulfillment wouldn't leave us feeling empty.
Exactly.
But we do feel empty.
We do.
So therefore,
it's
all a mistake.
Well, that's his conclusion, yeah.
He even says that boredom is basically the feeling of how empty existence really is.
Yeah.
Proving that it has no real value on its own.
It's like a direct experience of that emptiness.
And he contrasts this with like an imaginary situation, where life does have value. And in that case, he says boredom wouldn't exist.
Right.
Because just being alive would be satisfying.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
It is.
It makes you wonder if our constant need for entertainment and distraction, is a symptom of a deeper lack of inherent meaning in our existence.
Like, are we just trying to fill a void that can't be filled?
That's the question.
He does mention that, like, seeking things,
Yeah.
and engaging in, like, intellectual pursuits can give us a temporary break from this emptiness.
They can provide a distraction.
Yeah, distraction.
For sure.
He says life only feels okay.
Yeah.
when we're working towards something,
Mm-hmm.
with the obstacles making us think we'll be satisfied in the future.
So it's the process of striving.
What?
The anticipation of reaching a goal
Yeah.
that can give our lives a temporary sense of purpose.
But then once we achieve the goal,
Yeah.
that feeling kind of fades.
The excitement wears off.
And he sees, like, using our minds,
Right.
getting lost in thought or art
Yeah.
as another way to step back from the world for a bit
Right.
and just observe it.
Like watching a play unfold.
Exactly.
Engaging with ideas, with art, with knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
These can offer a temporary escape from the immediate pressures and the perceived emptiness of everyday life.
Okay, so it's like a way to detach.
Yeah, to detach and to see things from a different angle.
Okay, now let's talk about pleasure.
All right.
He says it's really just this constant striving that stops as soon as you reach what you were after.
For Schopenhauer, pleasure isn't a lasting state of happiness. It's more like the relief you feel when a need is satisfied.
Okay.
Once that happens, the feeling of pleasure kind of ends.
Right.
And we're often back to that baseline of emptiness.
And this brings us back to that feeling of emptiness and pointlessness.
Mm-hmm.
That boredom that comes up when we're not actively chasing something or using our minds.
The constant cycle of desire, satisfaction, and then boredom really highlights the temporary nature of pleasure and that underlying emptiness that Schopenhauer believes is always there.
So, like, even when we're feeling good,
Yeah,
it's like there's this shadow of emptiness lurking beneath the surface.
that's the idea.
He even points to this innate and inextricable longing for what is unusual as evidence of how glad we are when something disrupts the boring routine of life.
It's almost as if our inherent restlessness, and our craving for something new and different are further proof of our dissatisfaction with the ordinary, the predictable, the ultimately empty nature of everyday existence.
So, like, we crave novelty because we're trying to escape that underlying boredom.
That's how he sees it.
And don't think that having lots of money will save you,
No.
according to Schopenhauer.
Money can't buy happiness.
He says even the fanciest lives of the rich are just pointless attempts to run away from this basic misery of being.
Material wealth and social status, they might provide temporary distractions or a sense of superiority.
Yeah.
But Schopenhauer believes they ultimately fail to address that fundamental emptiness at the core of being human.
So it's not about what you have.
No.
It's about this, like, existential condition.
It's about our relationship to existence itself.
Then he brings up death
Yeah.
as nature's way of honestly saying that all this striving, this will to live, is ultimately pointless.
It's like nature's reality check.
Yeah.
He says that when even the most perfect example of this, a human being
Yeah.
decays and dies,
Mm-hmm.
it shows that all those efforts were for nothing.
So it's like all the things we build, all the achievements, all the relationships,
No,
it just gets wiped away in the end.
Death, in Schopenhauer's view, is nature's blunt way of revealing the ultimate futility of our striving.
And he argues that if life had some kind of real unconditional value,
Right.
it wouldn't just end in nothingness.
Exactly. If our existence had some inherent absolute worth, then its termination in non-existence would seem illogical and unacceptable.
But it does end.
It does.
And that to him is like proof that there's no real value there.
The fact of death underscores its fundamental lack of lasting value in Schopenhauer's eyes.
He even quotes Goethe.
He does.
High on the old tower stands the hero's noble spirit.
It's as if even in the face of death, even the most heroic spirit is ultimately just a spirit's something that departs.
Right, doesn't last.
It highlights the temporary nature of our individual existence.
So even the greatest among us are still subject to this impermanence.
Absolutely.
He then reminds us that we're just phenomena,
Yeah.
appearances.
Not the thing in itself.
The underlying reality.
Right. And the fact that death is inevitable proves that we're not truly real.
So, like, we're not the actual substance of reality.
We're more like projections or manifestations
of something else.
This distinction between how we experience the world phenomena and the underlying reality noumena, or the thing in itself, a concept from Kant that really influenced Schopenhauer, is key.
Yeah.
Death being a necessary part of our experience suggests that we are only appearances.
Not the fundamental reality.
Exactly.
It's pretty stark when he compares the beginning and the end of life,
It is.
The start is all full of hope and the promise of pleasure.
Right, we come into the world.
Yeah.
Wide-eyed and full of potential.
And then the end is all about the body breaking down.
Yeah.
And the nearness of death.
And the loss of everything we've accumulated.
Yeah, and the path in between, childhood dreams, youthful fun, middle-aged problems,
Right.
old age sickness.
The pain of dying, the struggle with death itself.
It all makes him ask, doesn't all this suggest that existence is a mistake?
Yeah.
That just gets clearer and clearer.
It's a rhetorical question, of course.
Yeah.
But it perfectly encapsulates his deeply pessimistic view
of the human lifespan.
Yes, of the human lifespan as a journey of increasing disillusionment and suffering.
So he's saying that as we get older, the illusion of meaning kind of fades away.
And we see the truth more clearly.
The truth of emptiness.
The truth of emptiness.
He even suggests it would be smart to think of life as just one big disappointment.
Oh, wow.
An illusion.
Yeah.
And that everything is set up to show us this.
Schopenhauer believed that the inherent frustrations and disappointments we experience in life aren't just random occurrences, but are fundamental to its very.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.